Hello, my name is Peter Parfitt. Welcome to the new Brit workshop. Now you may recall that I used to have a big cupboard in this corner of the workshop, and dotted around it in a higgledy-piggledy manner were all of my Bessey clamps. Well, because this is a corner which often appears in many of my videos, I thought, well, it's about time I tidied it up. So I've got rid of the cupboard, I've taken the Bessey clamps away, I've filled all the holes and redecorated that wall. And what I plan to do is to put the Bessey clamps back there, but in a nice, orderly fashion. And I'm going to show you two ways of building very simple racks to put your Bessey clamps in. Now, there are a number of ways that one could go about making the sort of rack that we're doing today. And one way would be to use dominoes. So you have a backing board like this, and then you have lots of pieces of wood, and you put dominoes in order to construct something which is going to support the clamps. And here is one I did earlier on, and you can see now how that works. And that's all very well, provided you've got the domino machine. But I'm going to show you another way for those people who've got nothing other than a screwdriver and some glue. And this method is very simple. All we're going to do is to take the backing piece of wood and screw onto the top of it, and we'll glue it as well, a series of pieces like this. And then the clamp then sits between like this. If you're trying to glue and screw lots of pieces like this on, it can be a bit awkward. So what I've decided to do is to do two at once, a top one and a lower one. Then when I've done all of the gluing and screwing, however it goes, I will then cut through the whole lot in one go. And then I'll end up with two racks. And because of the way I'm going to be setting these out with a spacer in between, there is a little margin of error. So rather than trying to cut these pieces of wood to the exact length, I'm going to leave them long and cut them when I've stuck the final one of these in place. I've just checked that these two ends here are square. So that's the first one, and now I've got a spacer which is 10mm in diameter, and I'm going to use that and progress along. And I will, from time to time, check the square. It's taken me about 45 minutes to do this. Now, I'll be truthful with you. If I had a choice, I would definitely use the domino because it's so much quicker. That's it, that's the last one, so I'm going to leave that to dry overnight. While all that glue is dry, I'm now just going to trim this end off. Well, that's that done. Now we're going to cut it through. This should be fun. Well, I don't think that was too bad, really. I'm just going to give it a little sand, but I've got to be careful about these edges that I don't round them over, because we're going to stick a little piece on the fronts of these to stop the clamps falling off. Now, I just want to break the edge on this piece that's going to go at the front here, and so I'm using a chamfering bit in the router table. There we go, both bits done. And the great thing about the CMS system is that once you've finished with a tool, you can then move it out of your way and use the space for something else. Now, I need to make up the pieces that will fit on the front of these supports, which will go above them by about 6mm, which stops the clamps coming off. And these are going to be mitered. So I've got to cut a whole bunch that were just the right length to fit across all these. So I've made up this simple jig. It consists of an odd end of the same material that I'm using, which I've done my angled cut. I've chosen an angle of 30 degrees for this. It could be 45 or anything you fancy, but I've chosen 30 degrees. And I've screwed this piece of wood, and glued it actually, onto a piece of MDF. and that's going to fit on my miter saw approximately here. I've got a little spacer here to keep that in the right place. And now all I've got to do is position it such that I can now offer up the piece of wood and do repeated cuts. Now, in order to make this process slightly easier, I have actually marked the 50 millimeters along this back edge, and I can just see that mark at the top here. But trying to position this in exactly the right place is tricky, but I'll show you a little trick. I've got my rear support here, mobile. I'm just going to lower the blade, and I'm going to get that so it's touching, just touching, and I'm going to lock that in position. So that's now locked. And now what I need to do is to get this positioned such that my pencil mark is in line with this rear piece of wood here. And I'm going to line that up, and once I'm happy, I'm now going to lock that in position. That's not going anywhere. Now I appreciate this first cut, I'm going to cut a little piece of the MDF. So I'm actually going to do that without that piece there. Right, so I've now offered my piece of wood up against the stop. It's all held down, it's in position, and I'm going to do my first cut. And I'm going to take that out and I'm going to check it. And that's absolutely super. And the only thing you have to do is after you've done a cut, you turn this over to do the next one. And that's the process all the way along till you've used up all of the material. Now you really must remember, when you're doing a production line process like this, don't take shortcuts. Let the saw come to a stop, raise it fully so the blade guard is there before you put your hand anywhere near here to take the piece out. Now, if you're worried about the quality of your nail gun or your nail gun nailing, you can always put some clamps on like this. I did decide to fill the holes where the brads went in. I think it makes a better job. So there we go. I just put one coat of Poly-X on there. I brushed it on and I wiped it off with a lint-free cloth, as I always do. And that's all it needs. I'm really pleased with that, and I'm really now looking forward to putting it up. Now for my second design, I've gone the domino route, and I've fixed these pieces onto the backing board using dominoes. And I've used 8mm, 40mm long dominoes. And I'm going to add to this design some sides, a top, and a little shelf in between. So the clamps will be up there and there'll be a little shelf above them, which one could use for little ancillaries or whatever. Now, I feel it's quite important that the whole weight of the rack is held to the wall using screws going through the backing board. And that's why I like a thick backing board, because these clamps are quite heavy. And so you can't build a structure around the outside and then just put a couple of picture hooks on there or whatever. You've got to think very carefully how you go about that aspect. Now the sides of the structure, I've found some 10mm thick walnut veneered MDF left over from, I think, the pedestal desk. And I've got some similar oak veneered MDF, 10mm thick, which I'll use for the little shelf. And for the very top, I've got some 18mm oak veneered MDF. So I've got my sides cut to size, but I want to have a little bit of an interesting curve at the bottom here. So what I did was I positioned this roughly where it was going to go, like so, which allowed me then to work out where the clamp would be in this, and it's going to be something like that. And I've put a couple of very faint pencil marks on here, so I know what's going on, which means I can now go about putting a couple of fancy curves in the right place. And hopefully you can see the line of the curve that I'm going to have. And I'm going to cut both of these pieces out at the same time. So that's in place, that's clamped up. I'm clear underneath there. I've got my screw holding that corner, so I can now go ahead. That's that done. And I've cut a thin strip of oak in this case. It's nice and straight, and I'm going to use this as a backing piece at the very back to help stop the shelf sagging. And that's just going to be glued on and clamped up, and I'll put a couple of very small screws in just to help it out. And whilst that rear support for the shelf is gluing up, I've just stuck a hardwood surround to the very top, which is the 18mm veneered MDF, and I've put a walnut solid wood edge around just to keep it roughly looking the same as the sides will be. Now, because I've got this raw edge of MDF here, you know, this is the walnut veneer sides, I've clamped them together. I thought it might be fun to put a bit of paint on there. Well, that's that first coat on, and of course, being MDF, it's now raised the grain slightly, so I will, when this is absolutely dry, just rub it over with a bit of very fine sandpaper and give it its second coat. So I've just added a decorative edge around here, and a little bit of paint's gone on the inside. That will come off very easily with the sander. And there you can probably see just how that looks. I'm really pleased with that. Now you've got to make sure, because this is MDF, remember, that you don't over tighten these screws. So I've got this on the lowest torque setting. Now I'm going to put a couple of screws through the top into these side pieces, and the heads of the screws aren't going to show because they're going to be above head height. And these screws here are not going to show particularly. It's a tool, it's not a piece of furniture. Try and get this in the right place the first time, because that saves too much excess glue going where it should not go. Now, this is the quandary now. Now, how do you now take this to the next stage? And although it looks awkward, this is the way round I want this clamp to go, because I will be turning this up the other way very shortly. Just check that, that's fine. Absolutely happy with that. Absolutely happy with that. And having done that, I can now turn this over, again very carefully. Remove these clamps completely. Although we've got screws going in from the top, you're never going to see the top unless you're terribly tall. Well, I'm rather pleased with that. Well, let's put some clamps in and see what they look like. Do you know, I've just had this thought that you could make something that matched this, but not for clamps, but had something here which allowed you to put your various chargers in, and they could be fixed on as though they are wall mounted. And then you can keep some odds and ends, you know, charged batteries or whatever up above. Well, I've just put a few odds and ends up there on the shelf, so they're tidy, and that looks rather neat. I'm very pleased with this red edge here, because it sort of complements the sort of Bessey colour scheme, doesn't it, really? Anyway, there we go. Thank you very much for watching. Take care. Bye-bye.